Hello and welcome to today's program, Opportunities for Supporting Voter Engagement as a 501c3 social justice organization. At this time, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Deborah Weinstein. Deborah has been the Executive Director of the Coalition on Human Needs since 2003. Prior to that, she served as 9 years as the Director of the Family Income Division at the Children's Defense Fund, after a decade as the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Human Services Coalition. In her 4 decades of advocacy experience, Debbie has brought a lot of groups together and fought a fair, common-sense federal state budget. Deborah, if you're ready, the floor is all yours.
Thanks very much, Trevor, and hello, everyone. I am Debbie Weinstein of the Coalition on Human Needs. Welcome to Opportunities for Supporting Voter Engagement as a 501c3 social justice organization. The choices our elected officials make affect all of our lives. That is always true, but every day, as we are beset by pandemic, natural disasters, systemic racism, and recession, we know how critically important it is now that all our citizens vote. CHN is very pleased to be joining with the Food Research and Action Center and National Low-Income Housing Coalition and Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice in the second webinar to help nonprofits get the tools they need to encourage people to vote. The first webinar, by the way, had an excellent presentation from Boulder Advocacy, the go-to organization for all those rules that nonprofits need. And on the last slide today, very last slide, you'll see a link to that recording. And there will be a third webinar on Tuesday, October 6th, that's titled Get Out the Vote, Opportunities to Mobilize People, and you will be hearing, getting more information about that too. We will be sending today's recording, slides, and other useful information to everyone who's registered for today's webinar, and you can download the slides today in that Materials tab. And as you're listening to the speakers, please type in questions, and we'll answer at least one after each presenter and the rest at the end. And one other detail, at the very end, there'll be a brief survey, and we hope you'll fill it out. So today you're going to hear from 3 wonderful experts who are going to share ideas and resources. First, we'll hear from Debbie Lombardi, the Partner Engagement Manager at Nonprofit Vote, an organization that helps all kinds of nonprofits to encourage voting among the people they serve. Debbie has worked on both state and national election best practices. She's done youth voter registration drives at Forward Montana Foundation and worked on the Fair Election Center's Campus Vote project in 2016. So you'll hear from her first. And then we'll hear from Sister Quincy Howard of Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice and also Coordinating Director of the Multi-Faith Faithful Democracy Coalition. I know from direct experience she's a stellar advocate for all the key social justice issues before Congress, and now will show how faith traditions are a wellspring of advocacy for a creative, just, and inclusive democracy. And they have fun, too. And then we will hear from Joey Lindstrom, Director of Field Advocacy at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, who will tell us about the Our Homes, Our Votes campaign, which engages the constituency of renters as voters. Joey has extensive and varied advocacy experiences in Madison, Wisconsin, and direct service, including homeless outreach and tenants' rights. So we have 3 wonderful speakers for you. Don't forget, type in your questions as you're listening. And Debbie Lombardi, welcome.
Thank you for that amazing introduction. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Nonprofit Vote and some of the resources that we have. But I wanted to start off by first telling you a little bit about us. So we are a 501c3 organization that was originally founded by a consortium of state nonprofit associations and national nonprofit networks. Since then, we've partnered with America's nonprofits to help the people they serve participate and vote. And now we are the leading source of nonpartisan resources to help nonprofits integrate voter engagement into their ongoing activities and services. That comes up in a few ways, and we'll talk about some of them in the next few slides. So starting off with some of our resources that we have for people, the first is we have a really extensive resource library for folks. So this is created to help you and people at organizations engage their staff and community. They cover all sorts of topics, including nonpartisanship, voter engagement, engaging with candidates, issue advocacy, and we have a special section this year on the census. You can find resources here from like sample voter registration scripts if you're new to doing that process, to 10 things to do from now until election day to help you kind of figure out what are the best ways to do voter engagement work. Next, I want to highlight Nonprofits Countdown to the Election. This tool was created from a need expressed by many of our nonprofit partners to share voting information, but did not have time to create their own resources to share with their audience. You know, with everything going on this year, I think people are feeling pulled in a lot of directions. So we wanted to create these templates to help organizations share information about voting across multiple platforms. So you'll find templates for letters and emails. You'll also find them for text. And you can find these links here, as well as some visual aids and social media graphics we've created to help folks with this process as well. The next resource I'm really excited to share with people is our state-by-state guides that we have created. These are one-page fact sheets. You can see a little image of a sample in the side if you're on the webinar. So these are created so that they're PDFs and can be printed. They have information such as voter registration and applying for an absentee ballot deadlines, as well as if there's early voting periods already listed and the actual election date on it. They also have helpful links and things that folks may need to know when thinking about registering to vote and voting. The reason they're printable is so that they can be printed and shared with people who may not immediately have access to the internet. They can be printed in color or black and white. Those are not on our website yet, but they will be on in the next few days, and we'll be making sure to share them with you all. We'll have one for every single state. So I want to talk about national holidays, noting that you may have seen a lot of them this year, or if you haven't yet, that's okay. But there's a lot of ways to plug into the larger voter engagement movement this year. So the first one is National Poll Worker Recruitment Day, which is happening today. I'll let you know a little bit about how you can get involved in that, seeing as today is September 1st in the next slide. The next one coming up is National Voter Registration Day, September 22nd. I always say that this is my favorite holiday of the year. You can sign up on our website to be a partner, and you'll be sent posters and stickers to help promote your event. The website right now also has information about what it looks like if you're doing in-person events and things to consider to make sure that your event is, feels safe and healthy for volunteers as well as people who may be getting registered. Next, is National Voter Education Week, October 5th through 9th. There's a whole week dedicated to voter education because there's just so many moving pieces when it comes to making sure folks have the information they need to go and cast a ballot. So over the 5 days, National Voter Education Week, we'll talk about things such as, how to apply for your mail-in ballot, what early voting periods look like, what kind of ID you may need when you go and vote, and other educational materials that can help folks. And last but not least, before Election Day, is Vote Early Day on October 24th. This is a push to get people to either turn in their mail-in ballots, either in person or have make sure that they are already sent. It also is a push to remind people that they may have early voting options available in their state. So these 4 holidays I really appreciate and think are helpful because they cover voter registration, education, and turnout. And then National Poll Worker Recruitment Day is really if you're able to go above and beyond or help others go above and beyond to get involved in the election process. So, National Poll Worker Recruitment Day was put together by the Elections Assistance Commission and Power the Polls, which is a large group of organizations dedicated to voting. This day is critical to successful elections in November because it's predicted there will be a shortage of poll workers because many people who currently serve as poll workers are older and may choose not to serve as poll workers for their own health, which we definitely recognize is important. But that means that it's a good opportunity for people who are able and maybe newer to poll working to step up and be poll workers. You can follow the steps on the slide to learn more about becoming a poll worker, visit the social media to see what people are sharing about it, or, potentially share information with others about becoming a poll worker. So we're super excited about this initiative, and I'm happy to answer any questions about it. The other cool thing about poll workers is in almost every state, you get paid to be there and help with the elections. So I believe that concludes my presentation. I just want to thank you all for having me on the webinar, and I'm excited to answer questions later. If you have questions or are interested in learning more about Nonprofit Vote, our Twitter and Facebook are in the corner, and I'm happy to follow up with you as well.
Thank you so much, Debbie. That was terrific. There's a tremendous amount of resources around, both your library and the state, specific stuff that's coming soon. Could you just say a little bit more about when people sign up for things? You said something about sending them materials. Are you actually sending, paper things, or are you sending links to things? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that was specifically in reference to National Voter Registration Day, which is on September 22nd. So they have a really easy partner sign-up link where you can say how many people you're hoping to register, whether it's 5 voters or 500, and what kind of materials you would need to assist you in registering those voters. And that means that we can then send materials like stickers and posters in different languages based on your request so that you can publicize National Voter Registration Day and your voter registration event. We recognize that some folks may choose to do digital organizing this year and may not need those things, but if you are able to do an in-person event, those materials can be really helpful. So that's the big place where you can get them. If you're interested in materials specifically for nonprofits about doing voter engagement, I'm happy to chat with you about what that looks like and potentially getting stickers about, I work for a nonprofit and I vote and things like that, which we also have available in our office.
That's great. And then, since more people, as you suggested, may be interested in voting by mail this time, in the library of resources that you have, do you sort of talk specifically about what the rules are for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we just uploaded a fact sheet on voting by mail, things to consider, and where there may be potential pitfalls. We also have an upcoming webinar on Thursday, which, you may be busy for, but if you would like to see the recording, we'll also talk about voting by mail. And we have in the Nonprofits Countdown to the Election, for this week's countdown, we talk all about voting by mail and where people can find more information about that, since it does look a little bit different in each state.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Debbie. And as we said, we will be sending the slides with all the links that you see out later, so you will have lots of opportunities to sorry, I'm just getting to where I need to be. You will have opportunities to get the materials that Debbie has talked about, so thank you very much. So now we're going to turn to Sister Quincy Howard of Network. And so, Quincy, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Deborah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here today to talk about some of our work. If we could start with the slide with the photograph on it, that'd be great.
Yep.
So Network Lobby was started by Catholic sisters in the early 70s, and we were actually started as a 501c4. It wasn't until later on that we decided to add the 501c3 arm called Network Advocates. That's somewhat unusual since it's more common really for C3 organizations to then add on the C4 arm. In the context of the Coalition on Human Needs, we do faith-based advocacy. We're not so much connected with service providers like a FRAC or a NILC, but our values generally align with supporting human needs issues, which we frame by our Mend the Gaps platform. Looks at hunger, looks at housing, looks at taxes, many of the same issues that I'm sure folks in the audience work on as well. Network educates, advocates, and lobbies year-round to advance federal policies that reflect Catholic social justice values. And really all of our work is done generally through as C3 activities and reported accordingly. We have a strong and engaged membership nationwide. You can go to the next slide. So today I'm mainly talking about our 501c3 campaigns in advance of November's election, which involves our virtual 2020 Nuns on the Bus tour, and also our election work in the context of the Faithful Democracy Coalition. But I do need to acknowledge and mention that for the first time in nearly 50 years that Network has existed, our board decided this year that it was time to flex our C4 muscle, as they put it. They felt that there was enough at stake in 2020 to justify a campaign explicitly against the reelection of the president, and they didn't go so far as to endorse Biden. We've never endorsed a candidate, but this was a very big deal for our organization to make this choice. So I thought it might be helpful to talk about how we've segregated that just briefly. Our C4 operation is called the Pope Francis Voter Campaign, which is on the right column, and it's completely segregated from our Nuns on the Bus work, which continues along our traditional C3 messaging, and it's tailored for our members and our partners who tend to be C3 organizations as well. Logistically, within Network, we've firewalled one employee who's on our communications team to run that entire operation, and we report any donations that come through that site to the FEC as required by law. So what we have here is a matrix just for the sake of contrast. This looks at the primary activities in each campaign to show the difference. For issue advocacy and lobbying, Faithful Democracy and Nuns on the Bus, we continue advocacy and lobbying around our core issues of interest, but now they're within the context of the election. The Pope Francis voter, however, messages specifically around with the explicit objective of influencing voters. Then if you look at the second activity, voter outreach and education, all three campaigns are educating voters around certain issues. But Nuns on the Bus and Pope Francis Voter also compare the candidates on those issues. And then all three campaigns are also providing get out the vote resources to try to increase voter engagement and turnout. And the final activity is only done by the C3 campaign. That's publicly facing tactics to influence the outcome in the election. So that includes also paid advertising online that is targeting voters. So that is specifically C4 work. Now we're going to move on and focus on the C3 campaigns, which is really the meat of this presentation. So if we could go to the next slide.
Yep.
So thank you. What we have here is the C3 Equally Sacred Scorecard that was created for the 2020 Nuns on the Bus tour. The candidate comparison is on the basis of our equally sacred priorities, which were pulled directly from Pope Francis' statements in the past. This messaging is meant to recenter the debate over a wedge issue, which is abortion, and to help Catholics and other people of faith sort of expand how they think of pro-life policies. So we encourage them to become what we call multi-issue voters as they discern for themselves how they choose to vote. Incidentally, I should mention that we also use much of the same messaging for our C4 branch, but we conclude with a very explicit pitch for what we think the outcome should be. So sometimes the differences can be tricky to discern. If we could go to the next slide. So the Nuns on the Bus is our public-facing campaign and network. It usually coincides, we've done this multiple years, and it usually coincides with an election, and it has really become the face of Network Lobby. The Nuns on the Bus tours are meant to build energy among voters around the issues that we care about, and also to get those votes out. So messaging of who we elect matters is kind of our classic C3 mantra, at least in the last several bus tours, and we're continuing to use that again this year. It's never been more obvious that who we elect matters than in 2020. Our virtual events, starting on September 23rd and running through October 23rd, they're largely going to mirror the types of stops that we've made on past tours. We are including virtual rallies. We're including virtual site visits, which often focus on direct service provisions and different operations that we want to highlight that help people. And we also have educational town halls. You can go to the next slide. So like in our traditional tours, we picked our route through states that are likely to be in play in the election. And what we want to do is elevate the lived experiences of people facing the greatest challenges and to highlight the most pressing needs as they relate to those states. An added bonus that we have found going virtual, we were very bummed that we weren't going to get to do the actual bus tour, but we've also found that doing virtual events in these states allows us to really expand the audience nationwide while still focusing on impacts in these key states. We are still developing the events, frantically developing our events and our schedule, and as they get finalized, everyone can go to our website at www.nunsonthebus.com to get real-time updates. Okay, you can change the slide now. Okay, so Network Lobby is also a leader in the Faithful Democracy Coalition. So I am now putting on my hat as the coordinating director of that operation to talk about our election work within the context of Faithful Democracy. You can go to the next slide.
Got it.
So Faithful Democracy is a non-corporate coalition that consists of primarily C3 faith-based organizations and congregations. So we unite around what we call our Voters' Covenant, which is a principal statement of democratic values, and our advocacy focuses on federal democracy reforms to create a more fair and just democratic system. However, for November's election, we are all hands on deck working for a free, fair, and safe election in COVID. Our coalition has been coordinating Hill advocacy together for election and USPS funding, educating voters on election challenges within the COVID context, and also pushing out get out the vote messaging together. We hope to use the energy as a coalition around this election to further grow the network of partners that we're working with in preparation for further advocacy efforts in 2021. You can go to the next slide. So our voter education campaign has went back further than this election. It included a series, it's called the Unheard Voices Educational Campaign, and it includes a series of toolkit chapters over the past year. These are for multi-faith audience to learn about critical aspects of our democracy that are in need of attention or reform. So you can see we looked at voting rights and disenfranchisement last year, also money in politics in January. In March, we had a chapter on the Census 2020, and it's important for how important it is for laying the democratic foundation. So we decided this year, in August, we decided we really need to focus our next chapter on having faithful elections in COVID. So it's a resource for voters and citizens to understand the challenges and engage in November's election. You can go to the next slide. So there are lots of toolkits out there. I just wanted to highlight a little bit how we think that this one is particularly useful to faith audiences and partner organizations. So our Faithful Elections in COVID it's a multi-faith and an open source sort of primer resource on the election. We make it available to really anyone who is interested to co-brand and claim as their own to push out to their own networks. We wrote it with the intention of having a really great foundation that can be supplemented with more specific things like social media campaigns, some of the holidays that were mentioned by Debbie in the previous presentation, and other messaging that sort of complements what is in this toolkit. And there are also lots of resources out there for state-specific information. So we tried to curate those and find some of the well-established ones that can get people to state-specific information as quickly and easily as possible. And then we tried to make it engaging as well by including things like reflection questions, scripture and faith leader quotes. We have an election prayer card, and we have case studies to demonstrate sort of how these challenges can come together to create situations like we saw in the Wisconsin and Georgia primaries. You can go to the next slide. So in addition to this educational campaign, Faithful Democracy is also coordinating with our various faith-based partners around messaging campaigns leading into the election. For example, it was mentioned that today is poll worker recruitment day, so we prepared a social media toolkit with a faith-based lens for other partners of ours to post and to push out to their networks. And next week, we will be kicking off the Faithful Voter campaign with a virtual event at 2 p.m. on September the 10th. That is with one of our partners, Faith in Public Life. We'll continue to encourage voters to make their voter plan before October, and we're kicking that campaign off next Thursday. We are also planning a coordinated month of action leading up to Election Day. We're looking to frame October as sort of election month so that people can really think about it differently. And we'll be encouraging steps, many of which were mentioned by Debbie, early voting, highlighting steps that can help assure that absentee ballots are counted, and also tempering expectations for quick election results on the 3rd. We know that it may take longer this year due to COVID to really be assured of the outcome. So our Faithful Democracy website is launching later this week, which we are super excited about. But for now, you can find us on the landing page, networkadvocates.org/faithfuldemocracy. And once we go live with our website, it'll automatically redirect you. So that is the end of my presentation, and I appreciate the chance to give it.
Well, thank you so much, Sister Quincy. That was terrific. And I guess there were a couple of things that I wondered about, and others are also, that you had mentioned the case studies, for instance, one about Wisconsin that you've put together. Can you just say a little bit more about what those are trying to get at, and if they're published in a way that other people can find them?
Sure. So really the purpose we had with those case studies, because the whole toolkit is about helping citizens really and voters understand why 2020 is such a challenge, right? A lot of people aren't in the weeds. They don't even realize that elections are administered really on a local, maybe a state level, right? So the toolkit highlights all of the challenges to the election and how we propose they should be addressed. But then we use the case studies of Georgia and Wisconsin primaries to pull together some of those pieces and to show how often when you have these different challenges that COVID is bringing to bear, it can really amplify and make worse some of the historical voter disenfranchisement, often based on race, that we've seen in past elections. So we really tried to pull together sort of how these challenges can lead to really a morally problematic outcome, and make proposals on how to avoid that in the general election. And we also have advocacy suggestions in that toolkit about connecting with local election administration officials to see how you can be helpful beyond making sure that your vote is counted.
Great. One more question before we go on to Joey. A real good and basic question. What's the difference between a 501c3 and a 501c4 organization? I know you laid out the differences in activities that your two entities are involved in, but perhaps you could say a little bit more about the difference.
Well, one thing I can say is that network kind of lives in a liminal space because of the sort of origins of our organization. I am by no means an expert, but from my conversation with one of my colleagues who is much deeper in the weeds, the C3 organization can do generally everything that a C4 organization can do with specific restrictions. So as I said that most of our typical activities are done as C3, and even our lobbying as an advocacy organization on our issues is done through our C3 work. You are allowed as a C3 to lobby. However, you have to keep very clear records of how much time is spent lobbying, and there's a limit on how much of the time an organization is devoted to direct lobbying. So we track all of that to make sure that we are under that limit and can legitimately do it as a C3. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, it is. And I think when we're at the very end, we'll certainly go. I see that some more questions are being raised related to this, and we will go back to Debbie and Joey as well. But right now, so first of all, thank you so much, Quincy, and Joseph Lindstrom, known to his friends as Joey. Take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Debbie, and thank you to my co-presenters, other Debbie and to Sister Quincy. That was great information, and I am going to share a little bit about the Our Homes, Our Votes 2020 effort. You can see our logo there. And then I'm also going to get into, because it's kind of our topic for today is kind of considering voter registration, just a few best practices that we really preach for housing organizations who are getting involved in the elections. So first, let me just share with you about Our Homes, Our Votes. This is an effort that NLIHC has been doing since 2018. And we were very involved in 2019 in engaging in the presidential primary races, both for the Democrats and the Republicans, because we really wanted to raise the specter of housing affordability in the campaigns. We got several presidential candidates to issue their plans on housing affordability, and that had never really happened before. And for the first time in anyone's recent memory, we were able to get questions during the debates that actually asked about what a candidate plans to do for affordable housing. Ultimately, what we're hoping housing organizations throughout the country will do, whether it's housing providers, tenants associations, homeless service providers, and so forth, is we are eager to see them register low-income renters, educate low-income renters about what's on the ballot, and share information about how to vote and what to bring with them, and then also get candidates to the poll, or get voters to the polls by mobilizing them on election day, or increasingly for early voting or vote by mail. We do this for some pretty obvious reasons. As you can see here, renters vote at lower rates than homeowners throughout the country. In recent elections, it's usually been about a 20-point difference. There are a lot of good reasons for this, most significantly that people who move frequently need to update their voter registrations, and people who are low income, of course, face more turmoil in their lives. And there are all kinds of important healthy behaviors that are less likely to occur during upheaval in your daily circumstances, whether it's going to the gym or participating in a neighborhood watch or voting. The challenges of being a low-income renter are significant. The disparities in voter participation are even greater when you look at it not by renter versus homeowner, but by low income versus high income. Households under $20,000 a year vote at very low rates versus households at incomes over $100,000. We believe that these disparities by income and by housing type lead to a policy environment where elected officials care a lot more about wealthy homeowners than they do about low-income renters. And if you follow housing policy, you know that this very much is true. So our efforts to try to get more and more low-income renters to vote is to try to bring balance to the voices participating in our democracy, but also balance to the policies that result from those elections. We know that the public agrees with us. In 2019, through the Opportunity Starts at Home campaign, we initiated a poll, and we learned that 83% of the public agrees that elected officials are not paying enough attention to the cost of housing. And in fact, 76% of the public say they're more likely to vote for a candidate who has a detailed plan for making housing more affordable. So we're asking organizations to jump on board as an affiliate of Our Homes, Our Votes 2020. People who participate will get a swag package of t-shirts and posters and stickers and so forth. We also make some branded materials available that organizations can use. They kind of just put in their logo and they can slap it up in their properties or in their community centers or what have you. We also amplify efforts through media engagement, and we provide guidance and assistance from NLIHC staff. And so this allows us to have a better sense of who's doing what throughout the country. In previous years, we would provide tools on our website, we would provide trainings through webinars, but we wouldn't necessarily know who was actually using all of those materials and putting that work into play in local communities. And so the whole point of getting groups to join as an affiliate has been to learn more about who's doing what throughout the country. Now, we've also done a sign project, which has some very similar benefits. And that's called the Housing Providers Council. This is specifically for developers and landlords of affordable housing, some for-profit, nonprofit, public housing agency, tribal housing organizations, and encouraging them to be involved in helping their residents get registered to vote and make sure their votes are counted successfully on Election Day. One of the key things that we can provide through the Housing Providers Council is access to voter lists, which means anyone who can give us a property that might have, 20 apartments in it, we can give them a list of who's registered to vote at that property, and they can identify who needs to update their voter registration and so forth. I mentioned on the previous two slides that one of the things we're doing is we're amplifying the efforts of housing organizations throughout the country to make sure that groups are learning from one another and that we're spotlighting positive efforts. We do this through our Tenant Talk publication, which is a periodical publication that we send out to low-income residents and their allies. This really breaks down lots of issues, and every 2 years we do an issue of the publication about the election, and you can see those on the right-hand side of the slide. We also have our media toolkit where we provide guidance on how to best promote election efforts, and then there's a little screenshot of our Twitter handle where we've been sharing about housing organizations that are working in the election and the ways that housing is being mentioned in the campaigns and by candidates. I mentioned earlier template materials. This is an example of one of the posters that we're providing where a group can take this template, put in the information about their polling location, put in the times it's open, and then in the square on the box right, insert their logo, print them out and put them up in elevators, waiting or lobby areas, common areas, and so forth, just like that. So that's the Our Homes, Our Votes effort and what we've been doing recently. I'd like to spend a few minutes just sharing on some key tips for voter registration, as this is, as Debbie mentioned, Voter Registration Month, as many people celebrate it, and then we have on September 22nd, National Voter Registration Day. When preparing a registration campaign, it's always important to define your goals and really kind of structure what it is you hope to achieve. Am I going to register everyone who lives in my building, everyone who lives in my neighborhood, all of the clients and all of the clients who come in for our services at our given food bank, if that might be your situation? The second bullet point, though, is equally, if not more important, which is connecting with the local board of elections or county clerk or city clerk who runs the elections in your communities. Elections are very different depending on where you are. There might be different rules for whether or not someone needs to sign their voter registration form, whether or not forms can be delivered by third parties or if they have to be submitted by the person themselves. But knowing and having a relationship with the people who run the elections is extremely important. We also encourage people to conduct registration trainings for all of their volunteers. Or if you're working with a community of low-income people, a registration training when done online and socially distanced can include walking people through a registration form so that they don't feel overwhelmed by it and they can do it confidently. Consider the resources that you have available for a voter registration campaign. This can be the funding you have available, the volunteer base you have available, the communications platforms that you regularly use to interact with people in your community who need to be voting at high levels. You really want to define your constituency and produce an intended number of registrations that you hope to collect. And establishing roles for your staff and for your volunteers is going to be extremely important. Recruiting volunteers right now is what's going to make your efforts over the next 3 to 4 weeks most successful. I want to spend just a couple of moments chatting about some common obstacles. The first and most important is voter apathy, and I have a slide in just a moment where I'm going to chat about that. But the most important thing for overcoming the idea that voting doesn't matter is to remember that negative messaging or a message of fear, I'm worried about what will happen if this election doesn't go well, generally suppresses the vote. And positive messaging built around the future of our community or the civic duty of voting generally increases voter participation. Many of you might have difficulty with your voter registration efforts if you work with low-income people who sometimes live in locked apartment buildings. Remember that owners and operators of locked apartment buildings will almost always allow nonpartisan voter registration efforts if the groups conducting those efforts put in a request in advance. So if you'd like to set up a voter registration table in a given building and do it in a socially distanced manner as required by COVID-19, most housing providers will allow that if you just put in the request in advance. Of course, that might be a little bit different this year due to COVID-19. Third, I just wanted to mention there's a lot of misconceptions out there about voters who have previously been convicted of a felony. Voters who have felonies on their records in most states can vote as long as they've completed their probation and parole period. There's a lot of misbelief out there that, you know, if I've been convicted of a felony, I can never vote again. In most places, that's not true. In fact, the only places where that is true are Iowa, Kentucky, and Virginia. again, remember, a lot of these voter registration laws are different from state to state. In fact, there are two states, Maine and Vermont, where people convicted with felonies are allowed to vote even while they are incarcerated, even while they're in prison. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, maintains a really good map of the various different laws that are related in those cases. Finally, I want to talk about voting without an address. For those of you who work a lot with people experiencing homelessness and who might not have a permanent address, remember that no person experiencing homelessness can be denied access to voting. But the really difficult thing is determining where a person who is homeless can register, because indeed the ballot that you're handed on election day, the one that determines what city council district you live in or which state senator race you get to vote in, is determined by your physical residence location. Now, different states have different policies on this, and in some cases, those policies are hard to find. So we recently put this up on the Our Homes, Our Votes website. But in many cases, a voter registration form will allow people to draw a map of where they live or write a description of where they live. I sleep on the park bench at this park at this intersection. I sleep beneath an overpass. This is where it is. In many cases, people can put in the shelter address of a shelter they're staying at as a really important description for finalizing a voter registration. I just want to share a couple of things that about confronting voter apathy, that there's really effective messaging if we encourage people to focus on a better and brighter future and connect the vote that they cast with how that better future can be achieved. There's an image here on this slide that I believe I stole from a nonprofit vote webinar many, many years ago. And it's a poster from a ballot initiative campaign in Massachusetts on healthcare. And it's always been one of my favorite examples of good voting campaign messaging. It shows a child who anyone who looks at this child will, of course, immediately adore and be devoted to. And the message is really simple. I can't vote, but you can vote for me. Suggest to voters who are experiencing apathy that what they can do with their vote matters to more people than just themselves, and it really draws them out from a place of being responsible to the community around them. At NLIHC, we have a field team of 4 organizers who support organizations and advocates throughout the country in this work. This is the way we divide up the country, and those are our contact information for myself and Kyle and Tori and Brooke on our field team. Please feel free to be in touch with any of us about how you can be involved as a housing advocate or housing organization working on elections. And then finally, I wanted to give a shout out for the 3rd webinar in this series, which is coming up on October 6th at, once again, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, first Tuesday of the month, just like we're doing right now. You can register at the link on this slide. We'll be discussing how to get out the vote and mobilizing people with regard to the election. We're going to be exploring vote-by-mail strategies as well as early voting. And we'll also talk about election day and key tactics to make sure people are getting to the polls and that people's votes are being counted and they're being protected from voter intimidation. We'll also talk about some of the social distancing guidelines and considerations as a result of the coronavirus, and we'll explore voter ID requirements that low-income communities most especially need to be aware of. So that's the information I wanted to provide, Debbie, so I will turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and I will actually put a big fat thank you up there. I wanted to make sure that we did delve a little more deeply into this issue of the difference between 501c3 and 501c4 organizations and what they can do. Debbie Lombardi, I was wondering if I know that you put some answers, but I think it's possible that the only person who could see that is the one who asked the question. So if you would like to maybe say just a little bit more, there certainly are some prohibitions for C3 organizations, and I know that Sister Quincy was getting at those distinctions, but Debbie, do you want to say a little bit about that? And if you're
I can speak to that a little bit. And if any of the other... Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. So I can speak to that a little bit. So 501c3 and 501c4 are essentially tax statuses that are different. But a 501c3 organization is a nonprofit that has to remain nonpartisan. There's a rule that the IRS put in basically saying that as a public charity, you are allowed to do voter registration, education, and turnout work, but you are not allowed to do anything related to candidates. This means that you can, offer voter registration, but not talk about personal political opinions and things like that. It also means that you can do things like candidate forms or questionnaires, but you can't specifically say, uplift a specific candidate for being better on an issue that you're interested in when that candidate is running for office. Those get a little bit tricky when you talk about when they're in office and things like that. As mentioned, I think the link to Boulder Advocacy was going to be shown again, but they're really the experts on this and can be helpful. 501c4 has a little bit more leniency on that. Both C3s and C4s can work on issues, but C4s have a little bit more ability to work directly on candidate engagement and supporting specific candidates. So I hope that helps a little bit, but definitely visit our nonpartisanship section of our resource library or Boulder Advocacy for more detailed things, and Boulder Advocacy can also answer a specific question that you may have about it as well.
Right, and both through the previous webinar, which we can send the link to when we send out the follow-up materials, as well as providing the link that to the particular fact sheet that was just mentioned, that will spell out some of the differences. Many of the groups, I don't really know, but I think many of the groups who are on this call right now are C3 organizations. We are at the Coalition on Human Needs. We don't have a C4 entity. And that means when we do our outreach, we're going to be talking to people about the importance of voting in a democracy. We can talk about all the critical issues that are before the country, many of which are life and death issues, but we will not say anything about any candidate's position on those issues. We'll leave that to the voter to make their own choices. There are the extent to which groups say more or less can vary, and you do need advice, and Boulder Advocacy is a good resource for that. Let's see. So we've kind of gone through some of the C3, C4 distinctions. Someone had asked how many people are on the call. It is around 270 people right now, but it is not very easy to tell from the information we have directly in front of us what organizations they're from, but it does glancingly recognizing some of the names that there's quite a variety of different kinds of organizations, including some direct service organizations, some advocacy organizations of various types, and I think there are people from all over the place as far as locations in the country, which is terrific. So the one question that I might direct towards Quincy, as now there are fewer opportunities for face-to-face interaction, but you have some opportunities for at least person-to-person interaction. Do you get anybody that says, why are you doing this? You're charitable entity, and I'll start with Quincy, but others can answer this too. You shouldn't be doing this. You should stay away from elections. Does anybody ask that? And if they do you have a response?
I would say that faith-based advocacy there are always people who think that because of separation of church and state, then that their translation of that is that faith-based advocates should not be involved in politics. We lift up Pope Francis and the things that Pope Francis says about how important it is to be engaged and to be involved in the political process and in politics, because it is up to us to protect those who don't have a voice available to them, or they can't make themselves heard. So our work is mission-driven. Our issues are based on gospel values, and we make sure to carry out our activities according to law, and we try to make changes in the ways that are available to us. So that the answer is that we exist to be involved in politics. We want to make social change on a federal level so that we feel like we can help to bring about a new creation and make things better for the people that are suffering the most in our nation.
That's very helpful. I know, Trevor, that you want to put up a survey, and as we're getting closer to the hour, I want to leave you the opportunity to do that. It's brief and it won't take you long, and I think we can probably ask another question or two while that's up. Trevor, is that okay for you to do?
Absolutely. The survey's been sent. Audience members, you should see it on your screen momentarily.
Okay. Someone asked the question, where can I get more information on messaging in regards to voter apathy? So I know, Joey, you started, you incorporated that. I don't know if you want to take the first stab at answering.
The question is just messaging on voter apathy?
Yeah, that's what I think probably related to what you were saying. What do you say to people who are saying it doesn't matter if I vote?
I think there are so many examples that we have in recent election history of extremely close races with really high stakes. These can include the presidential race in Florida in 2000, or really any year. New Hampshire in the presidential race in 2016 came down to just a few hundred votes. We've seen recounts in Senate races in Minnesota that were decided by just a small handful of votes. There are so many different examples that we can point to where one vote makes a difference. And so people need to remember that, every avalanche starts with a single snowflake, and every landslide with a single pebble, and every winning stack of votes requires each individual ballot in that stack. So no matter which side you hope wins, it's extremely important to make sure that we're getting our votes counted.
Great, thank you. And I guess one final question. In this world of virtual communication and social distancing and all of that, are you thinking about particular means of communication? You can't set up a table at the county fair or anything like that. Are there social media strategies or other forms of communication that anybody who's on right now feels is particularly useful to grab people who might be in the apathetic group. And I'll open it up to any presenter who feels like taking that one. So I guess we're still thinking about that. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is Debbie. I was just going to say, I think that's a hard question to answer, but one of the big things that we have found in the previous years is that when you tie information to your mission, since you're already directly working with a lot of the people you'll be talking to and the issues that you care about, those kind of connections and that you serving as a trusted messenger can be really effective for helping people make sure that helping people turn out to vote, because it makes them feel like their vote matters. I also think it's important to remember that local elections, things like that, can really help people think about how much impact their vote has, where sometimes national elections people feel a little drowned out, but there's going to be a lot of local stuff on the ballot as well this coming year.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks so much to Debbie Lombardi and Sister Quincy Howard and Joey Lindstrom for their terrific presentations. You will receive both the recording and the slides and additional information. Don't forget about the third webinar coming October 6th. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. We need you. It's not a democracy if large proportions of poor people, renters, young people, people of color can't vote, don't vote, or don't feel they can vote safely. We can all help, and we're counting on you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Debbie.
Very good, very good. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today and for your participation. We'd also like to thank our presenters for sharing their expertise. At this point, just want to remind you to complete the survey that popped up on your screen a minute ago. We appreciate this feedback. Again, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope you have a great afternoon.